welcome you all to today's book discussion on the recently published edited volume titled Handbook of Global Philosophies on AI Ethics Towards Sustainable Futures, co-edited by Professor Naresh Singh and Professor Ramachandran. This book invites us to reimagine the ethical foundations of artificial intelligence through a truly global lens. It asks and responds to various thought-provoking questions like what would the impact be if AI were developed with the wisdom of Ubuntu, the harmony of Confucian thought, or the Indian principle of Vasudev Kutumbakam, that is, the world is one family, at its very core. At a time when AI technologies are reshaping societies, economies, and even human relationships, this collection challenges us to move beyond Western-centric paradigms and to envision AI systems that are fair, inclusive, and reflective of the values of all humanity. Addressing issues such as bias, fairness, privacy, and existential risks, the book also explores how religion, culture, and social movements shape AI's application in fields such as finance, education, and the military. Ultimately, it asks one of the most important questions of our time. What kind of world do we want AI to build for all of us? We are truly delighted to have both editors with us today. Professor Naresh Singh is Professor and Executive Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, as well as Director of the Center for Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality, and Public Policy, co-director of the Center for Legal Empowerment of the Poor, and Senior Fellow at the Jindal India Institute. His teaching and research bring together complexity sciences, systems thinking, applied spirituality, and public policy, always with an eye toward ethical and sustainable governance. The second editor is Professor Ramachandran, who's professor and vice dean at the Jindal School of Banking and Finance and director of the Center for Online Education. His teaching and research span emerging technologies such as fintech, blockchain, and artificial intelligence, as well as management, leadership, and entrepreneurship. His current research focuses on the transformative nature of AI and fintech across industries and how government policies and educational technologies shape the future of learning and work. We're also delighted to have Dr. Sushant Kumar as our discussant. Dr. Kumar is an assistant professor and assistant dean of social outreach at the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, a former fellow of the Harvard Kennedy School's Program in Science, Technology, and Society. He holds a PhD in public policy from Northeastern University, Boston. His work lies at the intersection of science, technology, and society, focusing on anticipatory governance, responsible innovation, and the policy dimensions of emerging technologies such as AI. So the flow of the session is something like this. Professors Naresh Singh and Ramachandran will each speak for about 10 minutes, offering insights into some of the core arguments and perspectives of the book. It will be followed by Dr. Sushant Kumar, who will then share his reflections and remarks for about 15 minutes. After that, we'll open the floor for questions and discussion. Once again, thank you all for being here, and we can now begin. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Professor Naresh Singh. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Prachi, for hosting this, and thanks to Ideas for hosting this little book discussion. Let me start at the outset by saying that the inspiration for this book came from a conference which was co-hosted by the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy and the resident coordinator of the UN system in India, Madam Renata Lok, who was the RC, which is the resident coordinator of the UN system, and dean of our school, Professor Sudarshan, are the two visionaries, I would say, behind this idea. I was involved in that conference. So that gave us this idea that we needed to go beyond just the Western ethical statements that had been made up to that point on AI ethics, and to see what ethical insights one might get from other philosophical systems. So the book then, well, at the beginning, we were going to try and get the presenters at the original conference to write chapters for the book. But by the time we got around to doing the book, many of those presenters had either published their work somewhere else, or they were no longer available to work with us. A few have, and we are grateful. But this book has only chapters by a few of those, but many new writers. So I should acknowledge as well my co-editor, Professor Ramachandran. When I took on this, I realized it was a big task. I knew that Professor Ram was also working on AI, and we got together and did the work required to get this. So we are both happy that the book has now come out. So let me quickly then, in a few minutes I have, say that the focus of the book then is ethical insights beyond individualistic growth and profit-driven policy making. We look at those and how these insights can help guide the evolution of AI. And the context clearly is that, as we all know, AI's rapid expansion is guided at this time largely by market incentives, competitive innovation, and growth-driven policy logics. This narrow focus, we believe, risks amplifying inequality, ecological harm, and creating social fragmentation. And hence the running title of our book, as you will see, is Toward Sustainable Futures. Let me highlight a few things that I believe will be useful to you, and I will conclude my brief remarks by recognizing that if this book had a significant influence, it should be that it would be a wake-up call for, I would go as far as to say, a civilizational regrounding of AI ethics, in which we integrate global wisdom traditions that place relationality, duty, virtue, and collective well-being at the center of this massive technological evolution, or one might say revolution, that we are witnessing. So the first big point is the key ethical insight I would say of this book is moving beyond the Western paradigm of individualism, growth at all costs, and profit as the key drivers. And we therefore look at how a relational paradigm and relations between people, persons as individuals, yes, but communities, ecosystems, and so on, move beyond the individual as the primary moral unit. And as Prachi mentioned, the principle of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the world as one principle, in a way captures or encapsulates that idea. So it's moving to relationality over atomized individuals as such. That's the first big insight. The second big insight is that we are arguing in this book, and I'm distilling from many of the chapters here, is that communal flourishing and sustainability must be guiding ethical principles rather than mere growth. The third big principle that I would highlight is that we're talking about a plural philosophical foundation and value diversity. What do I mean by all of that? Is the book insists on moving beyond the dominant Western ethical frameworks, such as individualistic liberalism, utilitarian cost-benefit reasoning, even deontological rights frameworks, to embracing diverse traditions, including Confucian role ethics, Buddhist interdependence, Dharmic duty ethics, Ubuntu principle of I am, because we are highlighting the relational ethical way of thinking, and then drawing as well from some of the work that we do in our Center on Complexity Economics, Applied Spirituality and Public Policy, to actor network and complex systems thinking. This plural basis is critically important, we believe, because AI is global in scale. It crosses cultures and it impacts dramatically across social, economic, and cultural contexts. Clearly, then, having a very narrow ethical frame, which is what has been guiding AI so far, will not do the best for the world and for the world's peoples. The fourth principle I will highlight, and this one I think is perhaps the key one for me at least, that technology has to be seen as co-constitutive rather than instrumental. What do I mean by that? Is that AI must not be seen merely as a tool to be placed under human control, which is the argument we see virtually everywhere, but rather seen as part of a co-evolving socio-technical system where you have actors, networks, relationships, ecologies. For example, we have a chapter on swarm intelligence, actor network theory, and complex systems. So it is the guidance, you see, the shift that we are talking about is that ethical question that we have been discussing. How do we use AI safely, right? That's the common way of thinking about AI ethics. We are arguing shift from the question of how do we use AI safely to how do we shape the evolving mesh of relations, human machines nature, so that the resultant system supports relational integrity rather than fragmentation and extraction, which is the kind of social norm or underlying social norm that drives today's civilization. The fifth big issue that I would highlight, and I'd be wrapping up soon, is duty, or that is highlighted in the book, and I'm just flagging it, duty, virtue, and character rather than solely rights or utility. And the point here is that while much AI ethics emphasizes rights, it is really talking about privacy and autonomy concerns. Important, yes. It is also talking about utility, benefits, and efficiency. The book is arguing that we need to go beyond these and emphasize duty, what one ought to do, virtue, character, wisdom, interconnectedness, and role responsibility, um, following Confucian way of thinking, and also interdependence, drawing from the Buddhist tradition. And so we have a chapter, for example, on the dharma of AI, which frames AI's dual potential of being the greatest friend or the worst enemy in duty terms. And the final principle I want to highlight is governance and social well-being over unchecked innovation. And so what we are underscoring here is that ethical AI demands robust governance, equity, inclusion, and accountability rather than defaulting to market logic or the technological imperative, which is about driving innovation for its own sake, for growth and profit. So we ask basic questions such as, whose ethics are we talking about when we talk about ethics for AI? And what challenges the dominance of the Western growth-driven models will bring for AI ethics? So that's where I am. are the few points I wanted to highlight. I will leave the rest to respond to any questions and turn it back to our moderator, or we can go straight to Professor Ram for his insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Singh. I now request Professor Ramachandran for his initial introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Prachi. Hope everyone can hear me clearly.
Yes.
That was a very exhaustive opening remarks from Professor Naresh, and I want to thank him for that, because a lot of the things that I wanted to cover, I'm sure he has covered. But the whole genesis from my standpoint was not as scientific and complex like Professor Naresh mentioned. It was a very casual conversation. I remember that we were standing waiting for the shuttle at Jindal Global City, and one thing led to the other, and we were talking about the whole AI ethical discourse, how it has become so remarkably homogeneous, right? And even though it comes from scholars from across the different continents and economies, basically reflecting the Western philosophical frameworks. And so the question was as to how do I go beyond the rhetorical curiosity and talk about the recognition that AI systems that reshape human societies wasn't encoding the basic civilizational value that Professor Naresh talked about as the universal truth. Obviously, because that is dangerous, right? So how do we set out to create something different? Not a book that says that adds on non-Western perspectives, but as interesting alternatives, but one that centers them as equally legitimate starting points for any AI ethics and governance conversation. So what I would like to do is I want to talk about, from my own viewpoint, what was the vision and the challenges that I faced, right? I'll start with that, and I'll be reasonably transparent, so some of the questions that may come up may actually be addressing that. So what I wanted to focus was on three things. First was a genuine, the pluralism, epistemological pluralism that exists, right? And so here is the Western ethics plus some other views, right? I think I touched on that. So I wanted to go away from that and say, how do we provide equal standing that shape AI development, be it in Shintoism or through Confucianism or other feministic viewpoints and so on and so forth, right? So we wanted to make sure that all of them have the same hearing and same foundational weightage, if you will. The second for me was to provide the sectoral specificity. What I mean by that is there are lots of books and handbooks and reference documents that talks about AI ethics principles in generic terms, divorced from actual context. So we wanted to make sure that the contributors, the authors are dealing with finance and education and military and other governance aspects, so that how different domains actually can provide different ethical approaches. So it's not a one size fits all, but we have to tailor it and make it relevant across different industry and sectors. And the third thing, given that we were all housed in the Jindal Global University in India, we wanted to provide a little more of the global South centrality. So we wanted to ensure that the non-Western voices, if you will, were not just tokenistic in nature, but also provided actual conceptual anchors, right? So we wanted to make sure about that. So roughly about half our contributors are from Africa, Asia, Latin America. So that is not about representation, but fundamentally we wanted to make sure that these books provided the necessary intellectual DNA that went beyond the Western hemisphere, if you will. It didn't mean that we didn't include some of the fundamental, Western principles and Christianity and other aspects of thought points, if you will, in our book. But we wanted to make sure it has an equal footing with other philosophies as well. So here is where I think I struggled a little bit. Probably Professor Naresh may feel slightly differently. The first one I thought was around the coherence problem. How do you maintain intellectual coherence across the 20 odd chapters, which is from different philosophical traditions and without imposing a kind of false unity, right? So we didn't want to create a harmonized approach. So whether the demand for a Confucian ethics chapter and a feminist ethics chapter speak the same language or reach compatible conclusions, we didn't want that. So our solution was establishing a shared questions rather than shared answers, right? So we started with that. So when we did have the initial several dialogues with our authors, we wanted to make sure that they address fairness, autonomy, and accountability through their own frameworks, right? So I think we have, if I look back and reflect on it, I think the handbook has actually succeeded in avoiding any kind of incoherence across the chapters without forcing any kind of homogeneity, which can kind of tend to happen, right? But it required us to be negotiating and ensuring that there is no very specific aspects that come into mind that is going to be too siloed, right? So we wanted to ensure that. So that was a negotiation that we needed to have, and so that was one of the things. The second was around the depth versus breadth trade-off that we felt. There were authors who, created 15,000 and 20,000 word, essays, if you will. But because this is an edited handbook, we couldn't provide like a monograph, right? So if you think of Confucian AI ethics, or if you think of how do robots operate in the future, we can get into whole book by itself, right? So we didn't want to. So while we were introducing multiple traditions, we could get 20 to 30 pages of that. But obviously, some of the specialists that we did engage with, they wanted to write a 200-page essay on it, right? So that was a problem. So we chose the breadth aspect of it a little more deliberately, rather than looking at the details of it, right? So that it provides instead of providing an exhaustive treatment of one, we wanted to make sure that the handbook was a reference material that would provide each tradition with their own treatments and so on and so forth. And the third one I would say is the implementation gap. And this is where I think we may have fallen a little short, at least from my standpoint. Because once it was, when we think about all these things around AI and ethics and what kind of governance frameworks and philosophies that we need to implement, we can simply say that financial AI systems should embody Ubuntu principles, right? We could say that. But then if it is completely different matter to say that, hey, JP Morgan Chase or Citigroup or Goldman Sachs, you need to how to actually do that, right? We didn't get there. So given their own training and incentive structures and legal constraints and and technical systems that they may have, it is a lot more challenging, right? So what we have done is we have tried to provide some certain design principles and philosophical frameworks, but we provided less of the institutional mechanisms, if you will, or the regulatory architectures and political strategies that may come in place because of the location they are in. So I'll just wrap it up by talking about what makes this handbook a lot more different, and I'll add on to or probably supplement whatever Professor Naresh mentioned. So what differentiates it from the existing AI ethics literature is that we argue, right through, is that the Western frameworks aren't just incomplete. I think we believe that they are inadequate. Okay. So when you talk about the global perspective, this is especially in the chapter on on finance, which I was a lead author on. I believe that there is incompatible conceptions of fairness, right? One, emphasizing individual treatment, other community context, right? So we are not adding liberal, quote unquote, liberal frameworks without missing something very fundamental, right? So So when you think of fair credit scoring, how it treats individuals identically. So the Ubuntu ethics might see this as unjust because it ignores how communities support individuals. To go back to Professor Naresh's point earlier, right? So these differences aren't reconcilable, right? Through technical tweaking, they are different worldviews, right? So one needs to understand that. So we have dealt with that in this handbook. The second is, like Professor Naresh said, we have embraced pluralism, right? Rather than trying to seek a synthesis and homogeneity, we have not done that. We're a little more skeptical, I would say. So when a Buddhist economics professor talks about financial growth serves well-being or not, it is not offering a different way to optimize the markets. It is basically questioning whether growth optimized market should even exist. So very fundamental, right? So some of those things come across. The third, I think, is I mentioned about the sectoral specificity. So with the chapter 10 or 11 talks about the educational AI, and there are things around the how that is being dealt with in a especially in the finance standpoint. It's about distributive justice, while educational AI raises questions about learner autonomy and pedagogical relationships and so on and so forth, right? So in the military, how AI is being used, it forces existential questions about autonomous weapons and how generic AI principles can't address this diversity. So that's where I think we have made a significant contribution from a scholarly standpoint to ensure that there are these diverse views, worldviews that comes into play rather than trying to force some level of homogeneity or saying that this is one way and these are some of the other interesting ones. So I'll stop there, and then I'm sure that we'll address a little more of the same during the Q&A session as well. And then back to you, Prachi. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ramachandran. I now request our discussant, Dr. Sushant Kumar, for his reflections or questions, if any.
Thanks, Prachi. First of all, let me start with congratulations in order for Professor Naresh and Professor Ram to take on this really important and substantive work at a time where conversation on ethics is really just a footnote or like afterthought to AI-related conversations. And any ethical value that we seem to hear about is basically efficiency. In conversation with about AI in general, like how things will become more efficient, more productive, but it remains to be heard, like efficiency for whom or productive enough for whom. So those kind of equity questions get sidelined. So first of all, really a lot of congratulations to both the authors to take on this work and not just cover any ethical principle, but a spectrum of ethical principles that can guide AI. Because as rightly pointed out, AI systems which are built largely in Silicon Valley come with certain set of principles which are by default Western in nature, and then they get exported throughout the world, and we come to inherit them, and we train them. We are in a sort of a live experiment where we are like training these models as we engage with them. So those ethical principles is what gets sort of embedded in our own workings as well. So and the recent AI governance guidelines also, which came out just like a few days back, if you also look at that, the government is very clear. It has taken a pro-innovation stance, and it has kind of shied away from coming up with more governance and regulatory framework. And me and Professor Naresh were also talking about it. Even from the highest offices in government, talking about responsible AI or ethical AI is like frowned upon right now. So the importance of this work of thinking about ethics in AI is cannot be more important. I would raise three questions that kind of strike me when I was hearing Professor Naresh and Professor Ram. First is, I think, which most of the audience member might also have, is that the idea of philosophical pluralism sounds very intellectually interesting. If authors could like shed light a little bit on how do you operationalize these in policy context, right? Like even like if you take one principle of Ubuntu, which is really fascinating to me also because it talks about the idea of relationality, right? Because most of the AI engagement that we have is rooted in the idea of extractivism, where we extract from AI models like give me this or give me that. Those are the kind of prompts that we kind of feed into the AI systems that give me a response this long or give me exactly this kind of framing. So that is a very extractivist kind of relationship, and then AI models kind of extract from Earth in terms of resources, energy, water, whatnot. So the idea of relationality can like really rewire the relationship between AI models and human beings. So Ubuntu can be really helpful. So if you could like set some examples through which how do we really achieve those kind of principles in action in the policy design. And one question to Professor Neri specifically talked about whose ethics are we talking about when we are talking about AI ethics? And it's a pertinent question in the current political atmosphere of the country as well. Like, how do we avoid such conversation from being usurped by majoritarian ethics? Certain kind of ethics that might resonate more with certain political establishments. So when you talk about AI ethics, like how do you trade that line where you keep it also sufficiently neutral enough and diverse enough to represent different groups? So I'll stop there and I'll let the authors speak, and then we can open it up to Q&A perhaps. Thank you.
Professor Naresh and Professor Ram, if you could briefly respond to Dr. Sushant's questions, and then we can maybe open it up for Q&A.
Right. If I might start, Ram.
Sure, please.
So, it's the question of how do you deal with this issue of getting a democratic kind of view on AI ethics and getting the people's will and people's value systems into public policy is just as true for any other controversial policy as it is for AI. And so the way that that would change over time would be for people to become aware, to become educated, and be prepared to take social action as they do on so many other things that have bothered them over time. But, that is perhaps a little bit of a cop-out question. We in our book, as Ram has indicated, Professor Ram has indicated as well, we have a few practical chapters where AI is actually the way it would work in practice, like in his chapter, in the financial chapter, and a few others, the governance chapter that I wrote. We have some specifics on how we might apply these ideas. And one can develop a bunch of guidelines. I would think about issues such as relational metrics. So when assessing an AI system, include relational metrics, that by that I mean, how does it affect community cohesion? How does it affect intergenerational equity? What does it do to ecosystem health? With these massive energy farms that we require to drive AI systems, is it all being driven by dirty coal electricity, for example, or are we using large solar energy farms? The relational metrics when we are assessing, AI system. Now, if a country, the big challenge, I don't want to make this academic or theoretical, I would make it real in public policy. If you have a country like India, for example, and their focus was, for example, on entirely on economic growth and corporate advancement, profit motive, and so on, job creation, all of that. All of these are important things. This country has a lot of people living in poverty. That balance is what one has to work out, like in so many issues that relate to the future of the planet. And one can only hope that the public policy people will wake up to the issues that we are talking about. So many of these principles are within the wisdom traditions of this country. But going beyond relational metrics, a concrete way of dealing with this, in policy design, we might require impact assessments that go beyond individual harms and benefits to, if you like, network effects. What's going on with ecological footprint, what's going on with community levels action, and so on. We might look at a whole range of metrics, measurements, policy design, policy analysis, guided by the principles that I have just outlined. And we have been sort of working on this and developing ways in which one would look at public policy in quite a different way, what we call integral public policy, making policy in the face of complexity, and so on. On the governance side, one might include equity audits, labor, data, cultural capture, resource extraction, what's going on with all of these community voice mechanisms. If the country will allow that all of these might be included, that would work. Otherwise, a few practical suggestions on Sushant, that I would say we might need, for example, in India, other developing countries in the South, national AI ethics commissions, which are grounded in plural philosophy and public accountability. We might look at public-private partnerships in which hopefully these relationships I'm talking about will go beyond rates of return in these partnerships. We might want to do some teaching, curriculum integration at universities, at even high schools, where we are having public policy education, where we are having STEM, begin to integrate this kind of ethical understanding, this plural relational understanding in what we are teaching. You mentioned the importance of the Global South in all of this. South-South cooperation might be a way to begin to push this forward, and so on. So I would say, that we need to, our book, as Ram correctly stated, has put some pointers, some guidelines, some processes in how we can go in this direction. But this is the next step, if you like, and that we need to work on. But those are some preliminary ideas that someone might pick up on, or you and I might write a paper on how do we implement it.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Naresh. Over to you, Professor Ram.
Okay. This is, the $1 million or the $8 million question, if you will, right? How do we come up with something that is practical? So one of the immediate thoughts for me was, education, right? I think that is the fundamental thing that is, because this is such a rapidly and exponentially evolving technology, and the technology is getting adopted even that much faster, right? So, for example, on November 20th, 2022, when ChatGPT was released, within 5 days, it hit 1 million users, right? So that is the rate of adoption of these kind of technologies now. So given that, what is it that we need to do? I think the fundamental thing is education, right, and training. And it's at all levels, from the policymakers to the ministers to at the elementary school level, in terms of thinking about ethics in a slightly more expansive manner. Okay, while economic policies and political economy is driving many of these decisions, ultimately the policy needs to be translated into tangible, implementation approaches. So while you can put safeguards as it relates to governance structures, the action plans that have been deliberated between China and the US are so divergent in terms of their approaches. And the AI ethics policy that came out from Europe a couple of years back, they have tried to provide certain regulatory frameworks and steps. But I think it stops short in terms of how do you implement it, right? And how does it get regulated and monitored and reported on? I don't think that is getting there. So, just like Professor Naresh said, this is unlike any other, it's not like the problems that we have not faced before, whether it is in terms of internet and how do you, get into the dark web and what is allowed, what is not allowed. So some of those regulatory demands and has been implemented successfully with trial and error. And I don't know whether this is going to be taking any different path. It is important to ensure, right? Because fortunately or unfortunately, I'm sitting in the Silicon Valley right now. This is where a lot of the brain trust is coming out of, right, from AI related stuff. So the important is that the startup companies, the CEOs, the CTOs, the product managers need to be sensitized and taught as to how do I provide a palette of different options, right? So if this product is going to be used, let's say in an Islamic country where a Sharia law is going to be implemented, the way they look at finance and the way they look at lending is going to be extremely different than any other Western country, right? So you need to be considerate of that, and then the same. It doesn't take a whole lot, right? It can apply the same rules and regulations, but then ensure that the data points and the algorithms changes dynamically based on where it is being used and how it is being used. And this could be done whether it is in a Buddhist country or whether you are in a country like India. You need to apply certain philosophical structures within what they follow. I think that is very important, and this can be done, but it requires certain willpower from these technical communities, but also from a policy standpoint to say that, hey, you need to provide those minimum standards across different philosophical frameworks. I think that is very important. So I think that is how it gets implemented, right? Whether whoever it is, right? You need to say that you need to have these basics across and make sure that it is done. So one of the chapters in the book, Professor Selmer, he talks about how do I, establish. Let's assume that we have these new robots coming along, right? The latest one is Neo, and then Elon Musk is coming up with his own list of robots, right? All AI, supporting our own personal comforts and stuff like that, whether it is washing clothes or whether it is in terms of making a cup of tea at home. So Professor Selmer talks about how, the AI and these future robots in the next 10, 15 years, how will they deal with, let's say a mixed religious and mixed race household, right? If one person is a vegetarian, the other partner is not a vegetarian, then what about the kids? How does this robot recognize, and the AI recognizes that there is a mixed community with different types of eating habits? How do they prepare the food, right? And these are all things that we have to grapple with right now. And the AI algorithms and the data that is based off needs to be able to be representative across these different, factorials, if you will, right? And some of that will be driven by governance regulations. Some of them will be driven by incentive schemes, if you will, because ultimately most of the Western ones is going to depend on the incentives. And if the incentive scheme is not there, that's not going to do that. So if they find that there is going to be more market in the Asian countries and other countries which doesn't follow the same philosophies or the African philosophies, then probably they are going to be not so incentivized, right? So it depends on that. So I'll leave it at that. I'll let more questions to flow through.
Thank you, Professor Ram. We'll now open up for the Q&A session. Attendees can also unmute themselves or also type in the questions and I can read those out. We have a couple of questions in the chat box already. So I'll maybe read them out and you can respond. And if time permits, we can go for another round of questions. Ash Gulati asks, the first question is directed to Professor Naresh. Vasudev Kutumbakam and Ubuntu embraced in the book seem exciting. If you could share some more thoughts about them. For Professor Ram, he says, it's truly difficult to bring together diverse views. So if you could share that, while editing, how did you manage those to place them all in a balanced way? maybe we can, there's another question that Ashklati asks. As Professor Ram said, this could expand through education. While Professor Naresh mentioned STEM and schools, please share some immediate action top Sonipat schools could take. Uh, Another question is from Mosmi Mukherjee, who's congratulating the editors on the book. Ethical use of AI is a very important issue for us to think about, especially because AIs have now learned to deceive, cheat, self-preserve, and slip out of control, as it has been highlighted even by the godfathers of AI research, Yoshua Bengio and Geoffrey Hinton, and even contemporary philosophers such as Yuval Noah Harari. What are your thoughts about how to control an alien intelligence that has already learned how to deceive and cheat from human users already? If there's any more question, maybe participants can unmute themselves and yeah.
I'll be very brief, Prachi. I want to also acknowledge that a few of our contributors, our authors, might be on the call. I expect that at least two of them might have joined, and if we have time, it might be nice if they say a 1-minute intervention. Professor Krishnadev Singh from law school, who wrote a chapter in the book, is probably on the call, if he is. And then Madame Vidushi is probably on the call. She did a chapter on feminist thinking and AI ethics. But quickly to respond on, the philosophy is the Ubuntu philosophy. The essential principle, I am because we are, is a fundamentally different ethical viewpoint of the world and understanding of human nature and relationships than the Western concept articulated by Descartes, which says, I think, therefore I am. One is fundamentally individualistic, and the other one is fundamentally relational. The same principle, I would argue, is the one that comes through the Indian philosophy of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which is when it says the world is one family, it is fundamentally talking about a relational philosophy of the world where we are all interconnected. Now, these are coming from philosophical systems, but we work and we study systems thinking in our center and our school as well. And it's essentially the same arguments. All modern sciences are leading to the same destination, and that is that the world is not linear, reductionist, and even humans who behave in linear, reductionist ways are creating so much havoc. In fact, it is all those linear, reductionist, deterministic principles that have been used by policymakers as well as economists that have led to this extractive kind of economies that we work with in the world. And, all the ecological disaster, collapses, and so on, is because we have failed to recognize the relational principle, the interdependent principle, autonomous, yes, but interdependent. So it is heartening for us to see that both science and philosophy are converging to show humanity where they have gone wrong. We are therefore happy that the contributors in our book, in fact, the various chapters point to this direction of relationality, and the questioner has asked an excellent question, flagging both Ubuntu and Vasudeva Kutumbakam, pointing to this illustration of relationality. It's a very different ethical view. The Western ethical systems are largely based on utilitarian ethics or deontological ethics, moral duty and right and wrong. They don't go as far as ontological ethics, which is, while I don't know whether anybody used that phrase, maybe my chapter might have it, but others are pointing there anyway without using those words. So that's my quick response to that question, so that there might be time if the other contributors are there for a quick word. Thank you.
All right, let me try to address the couple of points that have been raised. For me, So first, I will look at the whole question of education and training. I think India, for example, as part of their AI mission and the latest the government directive to ensure that AI is being taught from middle school onwards. So there are several schools now they have included AI as part from the sixth grade onwards, right? I think that's a good step. Again, this is not pervasive. It doesn't obviously go across. Uh, I think there are a couple of things that needs to be done, right? It cannot be just focused on the English medium schools or things that are in the urban centers, right? This needs to be expanded to other vernacular-based schools as well, regional setups and rural setups. So that's one thing that needs to happen in a little more aggressive manner. Number two is that when you talk about teaching AI, that doesn't necessarily include ethical aspects of or ethical treatment of what it means, right? And so those two, from a syllabus standpoint, that needs to be included. I think that's very important to be able to make this meaningful so that it has a long-lasting impact rather than trying to get some tactical outcomes, right? Because a lot of these policies are driven towards future employment, right? Rather than thinking about what does it do to the citizens of the world, right, and their well-being. A lot of the policies are driven from that standpoint in terms of the political economy standpoint, right? I think the policymakers need to be shifting their thought process to say, is this the right thing for human beings, right? I think if you start with that, I think there will be a lot more of these ethical discussions and deliberations that will automatically flow into the syllabus as well. So that's my immediate answer for that one question. To respond to the other question in terms of the diverse views, I think it was not that difficult because once we realized that's what the objective of the book is to be, that we don't want to provide, as an addendum to all these other views and said that we are going to provide equal treatment. So we welcomed, and encouraged authors to be able to provide their viewpoint. Even the feministic viewpoint, there are a couple of different views. We even fit in that, right? So we wanted to include those. In education, we wanted to provide different viewpoints, and one come from Europe and Hungary, and the other came from India. So we wanted to ensure that there is a diversity of these views, but then we just logically group them together. So that's a short answer to that. Okay. And then Professor Mosimi, I think that's a fantastic question. I had few limited interactions with Professor Hinton, and he was short and sharp in his responses, and clearly their viewpoints are well known. Some people are really positive and upbeat on what the future is going to be, while others have a very differing views on it. I think, yes, we have seen examples and cases of runaway AI systems trying to, or even these generative AI tools if you're trying to shut down the model, it is trying to fire the CEO and do all this kind of funny stuff. Because that's what algorithms are supposed to be. It cannot be constrained because it is learning from the data and then modifying itself, right, to appropriately. And then generally, reality follows fiction. And so we have seen that from movies from 1990s, whether it is a Terminator, Judgment Day 2, T2, or whether it is the Minority Report. A lot of those things are actually coming to reality and put in practical usage now. And so we believe that many of these things that are being thought through right now can come to reality. The question is, how do you do it for the benefit of humanity and society? I think that's a fundamental thing. Will there be some negative impacts? Probably. But as long as we have provided the guardrails through rules and regulations and governance, I think we'll be okay. again, my personal view is that AI is good. I believe that in the broader scheme of things, it is going to provide better future for humanity. Whether if you think about it in a post-humanistic world, there are things that the AI could do that humans cannot. So we have to see that in that context. So it is not like humans are going to become subservient. We are going to coexist, and we are going to probably engage, and like Professor Naresh mentioned in his opening, we have to see how that this is going to get a civilization that is going to be cohabited with the machine world in some ways, in a more positive for a more positive outcome for the planet, right? So that's what is important. So that's where I live it in terms of my views, in terms of how this is going to transform and help humanity, if you will. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. We have another question in the chat box where it's asked that did the editors get any chapter on how students deal with the ethical issues of using AI in their work? I would assume that kind of research would include a mixed method approach and of where the book can be bought. I'm sure it's available on Amazon.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, if I may, Professor Naresh. So in terms of the ethical treatment of, we have not touched on the how the students view it, but outside of that, I have done a couple of research, experimental research on use of AI and especially generative AI tools by both the students and the faculty. Students still think that it could be a problem, but it doesn't affect them right away. So that was I did a survey with about I think 715 students or something like that across India, and then about 120 faculty members, 127 faculty members in India. And what I found out was, at least from that survey, what I found is that the faculty members felt a lot more diffident about using AI because of the ethical considerations, especially around plagiarism. The students felt a lot more, laissez-faire around the use of, generative AI tools and how AI in general is going to impact their education and learning. So, so that is one aspect of it. So again, it was not a mixed method. It was a very targeted, very time-bound, quantitative survey that was done and do that, right? The other question is, how do you buy this book? You can, I think it costs about $110 or something like that, or equivalent in India. We are planning to have some Asian releases as well, but we are in discussions with the publisher at this point in time. We don't have a timeline for that, but the books are available on Amazon, and I think we may get some copies in the library as well. Because this is considered to be initially we started as a book, and then the publishers recommended that given the richness of the content, they said this is better as a handbook or a reference book because it is going to be used by institutions and scholars across different disciplines. So they converted this into a handbook, and so the pricing also reflects that.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Naresh, you wanted to?
No, I just wanted to say that it's available where good books are sold.
Excellent answer.
Thank you, Professor. And as Professor Naresh had earlier mentioned, some of the contributors to the volume have joined us online. I see Professor Krishna Dev Singh with us. If you're there, Professor Krishna, maybe you could just jump in and give us some concluding remarks before we call it a day.
He has to unmute if he's there.
Yeah.
He left.
Do they have the permission to?
No, he says in the chat box that he does not have speaking rights.
No.
Can the AV team please help us with this?
Oh, I see. Okay, participants don't have speaking rights, I see. All right, then if it's not set up for that, I just want to acknowledge at least that a few of our contributors were able to join. We are hoping that we might be able to do a book discussion or other book discussions on the book in which the authors will have a chance to speak to their chapters. The logistics have been difficult for us because our authors are from all over the world. So we are thinking about doing like sub-regional because of time zone issues. But we are still working on that, and hopefully that will happen. So our authors will have a chance to speak to their chapters and get questions and so on.
I've given access to Professor Krishna Singh. He should be able to speak now.
Yeah, hi, good
Please
evening,
go ahead.
everyone.
Hi, we can hear you. Hi,
Hi,
Krishna.
so thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. In fact, it was wonderful listening to Professor Singh and Professor Ramachandran. So I do not know whether I can give concluding remarks. That's perhaps not what I would be able to do, but I'll just briefly share a note of gratitude for to Professor Singh and Professor Ramachandran for curating this work, a brilliant work and a very, very timely work. Just a bit of background as to why it was such a it was almost a serendipitous opportunity for me because I had been working in this field, and just as a quick background, my training is as a lawyer, and I had been writing on AI regulation. In fact, I'd also been writing on the sidelines my doctoral work on AI regulation, um, in all of which I had really been wondering as to how do I do justice to the point that I was trying to make? Because most of the frameworks that apply, for example, the underlying principle of non-maleficence and the emergent ideas from there, which include, the framework of rights, so on and so forth, had seemed extremely inadequate for me to be able to express, the ideas I had wanted to. And then I had the chance to meet Professor Singh in one of the panels a couple of years back, and he mentioned this book, and I was just right there. I had this inkling that this is somewhere where I really need to contribute. And thank you very much for that opportunity. The chapter that I wrote was really something I wanted to have written. The idea that we need to go beyond these fixed frameworks of rights, and not that those frameworks are not important, but in addition to those, something more is required, and which is what so many of these other ethical frameworks that the editorial team has brought together in this work was very, very useful, and I'm really pleased and grateful to have contributed. So that's all from my end, and of course I would look forward to if any other further events where I can perhaps interact with other authors as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to say that of all the chapters, right, including my own, right, that I've gone through the chapters pretty much word by word. Of all the chapters, Professor Krishna Singh's uh, chapter on hypersuasion is probably the most lucid and clearly written, right, of all the chapters. So if anyone wants to read and start with his chapter, it really distills in very clear, simple English as to this very complex aspects of the philosophies and the frameworks and stuff like that. So I would congratulate and thank Professor Krishna Singh for contributing and being part of this exciting project, if you would.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's very kind of you.
Thank you. I'd just like to take a moment to thank Professor Naresh Singh and Professor Ramachandran, the editors of the volume, and Dr. Sushant Kumar for joining us today for this very interesting and interactive session. And also thank you to all the participants and attendees, and also for their questions. So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Prachi.
Thank you, sir.